All right, let's jump right in. We're going to talk about something pretty mind-bending, language. Specifically, why the way we're all talking right now is just a single frame in a very, very long movie. It's always changing. I mean, have you ever really stopped to think about a word like awful? It's got awe right there in it. It should mean full of awe, something incredible. But nope, today it means something's terrible. So what happened? How does a word just do a complete 180 on its meaning? Well, that's not some random mistake. It's actually a huge clue. A clue that tells us language isn't some dusty old rule book that never changes. Not at all. It's alive. It's this living, breathing thing that's constantly shifting and morphing to fit the people who use it. It is always, always on the move. So, to really get a handle on this, you gotta accept one big idea first. Language is never finished. It's not a painting hanging in a museum. It's more like a sculpture that's being worked on by millions of people all at the same time every single day. And this quote, it just nails it. Variation is the seed, change is the growth. Think about it. Every time you hear a new slang word, or someone has a slightly different accent, or just a unique way of phrasing things, that's a variation. It's like a tiny little seed being planted. Now, most of those seeds, they just fizzle out. But every now and then, one of them takes root. It catches on. It spreads. And that's the growth. That's language change happening right in front of us. Okay, so as these variations are the seeds, where do they come from? The answer is simple. They come from us. Every single one of us talks a little bit differently, and all those little differences, well, they add up in some really fascinating ways. And here's something super important to get straight. These differences aren't mistakes. They're not wrong. From a linguist's point of view, there's no such thing as bad English. There are just different kinds of English. They're all legitimate ways people communicate who they are and where they come from.
Now, the one we're all probably most familiar with is regional variation, or dialect. This is the easy one. It's all about geography. It's the reason someone from Boston doesn't sound like someone from Sydney, even though, they're both speaking English.
Yep, here's a perfect example. In the UK, you'd call it a lorry. In the US, it's a truck. Same thing, two different words. Why? Just geography. That's a regional dialect in a nutshell. But it's not just about where you live. It's also about who you are in society. And that brings us to something called a sociolect. This is how our language can change based on things like our job, our education, or even our social group. And sometimes these differences are really subtle. Take a look at this one, sofa versus couch. Believe it or not, some studies have shown that which word you choose can sometimes correlate with your social background. Again, neither one is better or more correct. They just belong to different social groups. Pretty interesting, right? And it keeps going. There's also stylistic variation. I mean, you don't talk to your boss the same way you talk to your friends, right? Would you mind assisting me versus can you help? Same request, different style. Then you've got your own personal flavor, your idiolect. That one word you always say? And of course, language is powerfully connected to our ethnic identity. Take a phrase like, I'm finna leave from Black English. It's a completely valid and grammatical structure that means I'm getting ready to leave. Okay, so we've established that there are all these little differences everywhere in our language. But so what? How does one person's little quirk actually become, a rule? How does it make the jump? Yeah, how does that happen? How does slang that your parents hate suddenly become just normal language? Or how does what was once considered a mispronunciation become the only way people say a word 100 years later? It's not random. It's actually a pretty predictable process. Let's take gonna as our case study. It all starts when people find a quicker, easier way to say going to. For a long time, you'll hear both going to and gonna, but gonna is just easier to say. It's efficient, so it starts to spread from person to person. And before you know it, it's the standard way to say it in everyday conversation. That right there, that's the life cycle of a language change. And sometimes these changes are absolutely massive. Get this, the word night. If you went back to Old English times, you would have pronounced pretty much every letter. It would have sounded something like connect, with a hard K at the start and this throaty sound in the middle. Fast forward a few hundred years, and all those clunky sounds have just worn away, leaving us with the simple, smooth night we have today. Wild, right? Okay, but what about words completely changing their meaning? This is where it gets really crazy. The word silly. Today it means foolish, right? Well, centuries ago, it meant blessed or holy. I'm not kidding. The meaning has shifted so much, it's basically the opposite of what it started as. That's a textbook case of something called semantic change. So, everything we've talked about so far is how a language kind of evolves on its own. But the really big fireworks, the most dramatic, world changing stuff, that happens when completely different languages crash into each other. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine you're on a plantation in South America hundreds of years ago. There are enslaved people forced to be there from all over West Africa. One person speaks Yoruba, another speaks Igbo, another speaks Wolof. They can't understand each other, and they definitely can't understand the Dutch-speaking supervisors. It's a crisis of communication. How do you even survive? Well, out of that desperate need, something new had to be created. And what they created is what we now call a pidgin language. Now, a pidgin isn't a real language, not yet anyway. Think of it more like an emergency toolkit for communication. It had super simple grammar, borrowed some essential words from Dutch and all the different African languages, and had almost no fixed rules. It was just enough to get by, to understand an order, to ask for water, to survive. But that's all it was. But then, something amazing happens. The story doesn't end there. Because what happens when kids are born into this world, and that limited, choppy pidgin is the only language they ever hear? See, for that next generation, the pidgin isn't a tool. It's their mother tongue. It's all they know. But here's the thing about the human brain, especially a child's brain. It craves structure. It's built for complex grammar and rules. A bare-bones system just won't cut it. So those kids, they did something miraculous. They took the broken pieces of that pidgin and, completely on their own, they built a real, full-fledged language out of it. They instinctively added consistent grammar, they created proper verb tenses, they invented new words to express complex ideas. And that new language, born from a pidgin, is called a Creole. It's maybe the most powerful proof we have that our brains are literally hardwired to create language from scratch. It's just incredible. And that brings this whole thing right back to you, to the way you're talking right now. All that slang you use with your friends, those inside jokes, that specific way your generation has of putting things, it might feel like it's just temporary, right? But what we've seen is that every change, big or small, started out exactly like that, as just a little seed. So the next time you open your mouth to speak, think about this. Are you just using language, or are you helping to create what it's going to become tomorrow?